Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. Each episode, I will give a new guest a chance to discuss their background, culture, interests, or whatever they want to talk about to help increase all of our own worldviews. Today, I would like to introduce you to Anne Coccioli. She is an androgynous gay woman who is a published author with a PhD. She had a traumatic childhood but never gave up. So she is here to talk about her life experiences, the books she's published. I'm so grateful to have Karen here tonight. So thank you so much, Karen. Why don't you tell the audience more about yourself?
Hi, well, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm excited to be here too. And I love your podcast, especially because of your intention, right, is to exploration, and we're always exploring ourselves. So it's a fascinating subject, isn't it? The more we learn about ourselves, we learn about others. So I was born in New Jersey, in Jersey City, and lived in Union City, which is right outside the Lincoln Tunnel to New York City, for those of you who are not familiar with the East Coast. And I lived in a very multi-ethnic neighborhood. It was lower class. There was warehouses on the corner and smokestacks and a bodega on one corner and an Italian grocery store on the opposite corner. And there was Italians and Jews and Puerto Ricans, and it was a wonderful environment with tenement buildings. And for your listeners who may not realize what a railroad apartment is, railroad rooms is when you have an apartment, the front faces the street, but it's actually in the apartment. It's the back of the apartment. So when you walk in the apartment, you walk into a large kitchen, which has a table and everything. And then there's the bathroom and bedrooms and the living room at the end. And it's just like straight through. So just imagine me, an older sister of 6 years, a grandmother who came from Italy, my mother who came from Italy, um, my uncle who came with them, and my dad, and in this like really tiny two-bedroom railroad room. So, but it was all good, and I sometimes, Sarah, I wonder, I get, around the complexity these days of diversity, because I grew up with this, right? This was natural to me. I mean, the women would really be hanging out the windows on the weekend, the men, and smoking cigarettes, and you have the aromas, you'd have the smells of all the foods and the different dialects. And so in that way, it was really good. But we moved. My father did well. He used to actually produce Italian meats and cheeses right across the street from where we lived. And when he started making a little bit of money, we moved to a better neighborhood, what they considered a better neighborhood, and everything changed. It was interesting because my sister and I actually got pulled from an environment that we really liked. I was 5 and she was 11. Um, and they put me in a kindergarten, public school, and my sister went to a private school because they didn't have a kindergarten. And I developed a prominent stutter, really prominent. I was getting bullied from it, and people would get annoyed with me and frustrated, and it just changed life, for the good and for the bad, because now I was in this huge colonial home. I mean, three stories, right, in the basement. And my sister's, say, being 6 years older, she was kind of on a different plateau than me. And everyone kind of changed, right? We still had the family living with us, and my father being the only man, but he was a very volatile, traditional Italian man who came from an abusive family, and kind of kept that up. And so I would, when I had the stutter and not being able to get what I wanted, I turned to words. And actually, it was, I think, what really started me on my writing career. was I realized that, I could write my messages, right? I could write little pictures, I could write verses, which I did. And it made me actually look at language in a different way, because when we speak, the intonation of our voices says a lot, right? You ask a question and your voice changes, and you say something with an exclamation point at the end of the sentence, and you're going to have that. Well, when you're writing these words out, you have to find the words that are going to supplement the fact that you don't have that intonation. And so I really had a very intimate connection with language and exploring words and exploring how they worked. And at the same time, because of the stuttering, which lasted a couple of years, I was also a loner. So I would stay in the house a lot by myself and write. I mean, writing was my friends. For anyone who's near my age, and I'm 74, so I've been around a while, and I remember reading the Bobbsey twins. I don't even know if they make them anymore, but Nancy Drew after that, and writing was just really, it's always been my salvation. I say on my website that writing words are the breath and soul of me, and it really is. I can't even tell you how many times it saved me from different things that happened in my life. When we moved into that house, it was like, I don't know. Like I said, it changed the trajectory of my life for sure.
Definitely. It sounds like a lot of things changed and life started to take a different direction. Now, you mentioned how your stutter lasted for a few years. So, what was kind of able to change since it was something that you had developed that then you were able to grow out of it?
So, I mean, at that time, my parents had, when the kindergarten teacher was the one who called my parents in and said, you really need to get me into the Catholic school, which was not a good move. But they knew enough then to have speech therapy. So I did have speech therapy. They did realize they thought it was only from the move, that from where we were living in a very to this new place. But also at the same time, I had childhood abuse, and it was very traumatic. So my father started molesting me when I was 5 years old. So I'm sure that all turned into it, right? You can't speak because you can't yell, you can't ask for help, you can't. And so this stutter and and strangely enough, when I really get excited, which isn't too often in my life, but the couple of times I've really gotten excited or angry or something, to the point that I will still stutter. I will come out, but it was the speech therapy that did it. And honestly, Sarah, there's parts of my childhood that I really don't remember. I think, blocked out for my own preservation. And so I don't know exactly, the moment or the time, and all of a sudden I didn't stutter, but it was it was gradual.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you touched on a couple different things, to show why, it was happening and then to be able to get some help that you needed. And to hear that, sometimes now if you're too excited, it can come back. So, one of the ways you had your release was in writing. What was like your writing journey to start, at a young age to where you are now as a published author? Where has that journey taken you?
So in this home, right on the third story, and because my father was volatile, and he was just emotionally abusive to, like, everyone in the family. His anger was off the charts sometimes. But to get up to the attic, there was a very, very narrow, winding staircase, and adults didn't like to go up there. So it was a safe place for me. All right. And there was a fan light window. And I would sit in front of the fan light window, and I'd go up, and I'd even sleep up there some nights because there was a twin bed. And so a little cell, it almost like was a nun cell that you see in, in old time movies, right? It was like there really was a cross on the wall, and this little bed, twin bed, and the fanlight window, and I would sit there, and I would really just like wonder about the mysteries of life. Why my life, what was happening to me, how do I relate? And it was just like looking at the moon and the stars and the planets, and then I was a daydreamer, and I think I would just lose myself, right? And I would start making up stories. I mean, uh, Anais Nin, the French author, and she said one time that was just two quotes I really appreciate of hers, and I'm paraphrasing here, but one of them is we write life to experience it twice, in the moment and in retrospection. So I think that in the moment for me, sitting there and then remembering about it, it stayed with me, right? So that sense of safety in that spot, the sense of mystery kind of stayed with me. And also, she has another quote that references we write to create the life that we really would want to live, the world that we would want to live in. So I think that also was what that journey started. And I read so much. And then when I read, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Little Women.
Mhm.
And in it, there's Jo, and she's kind of a masculine figure in it, and she's the writer. And I never forget my aunt giving it to me for Christmas and reading it to me the first time. And oh my goodness, I want to be Jo. I want to be the published author, right? So, and then the first time I read Hemingway and The Old Man and the Sea, and it's a brilliant novella. So it's still one of my favorite novellas of the classics of all time. So the journey was always having to do with figuring out life. And like you mentioned about exploring, right? We mentioned in the beginning. So the journey is about exploring yourself and exploring life and notating it, right? And, putting it down in words in some form. I mean, I started with poetry, but I went over to fiction fairly early. I mean, I published my first novel when I was 30, but I hadn't gone to school. I decided that I wanted to get a doctorate because I wanted to be able to learn more about identity. And um, I was so fascinated by the madness, and especially women in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. And so it was really important to me to have the academic studies behind that, behind the writing. So a lot of the writing I do under my name is is informed by my experiences, but a lot by academic. And then I also write under author Annie Moon, and she's my alter ego, and that's more for queer erotica, but still messages, right? You can deliver a message no matter what the genre. So
Yeah. No, I mean, having, kind of the two separate author titles to then, like, you might have some overlap in people who read the books, but then if someone's like, I only want queer erotica, or I only want things backed up a little bit more by academia, they can do that. So what exactly is your PhD in, and how did those studies work for you?
so I started to go to a community college, state college in New Jersey, and I was always told I was stupid. I didn't do well in school because the nuns, I just questioned too much, and they didn't like that. And I was left-handed. They didn't like that either, but they always thought I was cheating because I had to put my paper a certain way
Mhm.
to be left-handed. Whatever. Anyway, but I thought it was stupid. I didn't know I was smart until I started Montclair State College, and I already had two kids, and I knew I was gay when I was early on, but because like a good Italian, I got married, and I had two kids, and I started having a 4.0 average. and was like, oh, well, maybe I'm not so stupid. And I'll never forget Dr. Nancy Drucker. She was my savior. The first time I ever wrote a story, she published it in the literary magazine, and told me that I had a talent and to keep with it. A long story short, I wound up that my ex-husband, we moved to Hong Kong for 9 years. And at the time, they were offering a program for English speaking Americans and Canadians. They would pay us to go to school there. And at that time, the University of Hong Kong was under the auspices of the British government yet. It didn't change over till 1996. And so my education was stellar. I mean, I went my bachelor's right through to my doctorate, and I got paid. So, I mean, you can't ask for more than that. I had professors from Cambridge, from Oxford. They paid so well that we had professors from Harvard and, MIT. I mean, all these really great schools. And they didn't have at the time, 25 years ago, they didn't have a doctorate in gender identity or gender studies or feminism, but they did. But I took comparative literature. And in the University of Hong Kong, in the Chinese system, you didn't, or in the British system at that time, you went full time for 3 years for your bachelor's. There was no summer breaks. And you didn't take an array of courses. You didn't have to take math. You didn't have to take life sciences. You only took what was your major. So my major was comparative literature, but it was within philosophy, religion, psychology, sociology. They did have some women's studies courses they started having at that time. And so again, it all helped me start identify who I was. So that I still go back to, I still go back to the studies that I had there and to the books. And I still I love to learn. I'm a lifelong learner. So I still read, try to read on the gendered bodies and gendered constructions. And it gave me a really foundation for my writing as a queer woman, especially.
Uh, and so you mentioned how, with your personal identity, you always knew you were gay, but the good Catholic in you got married and had children. So if you're willing to talk about it, kind of like what was the process of being able to be more true to yourself and your identity?
So I'll just kind of back up a second because what happened to me, I can't speak for anybody, but the abuse that I went through for the years with my father, and it was ongoing. So it hardwired my brain, right? So that you don't make decisions for yourself. My brain wasn't independent of the fact that if I didn't do what I was supposed to do, that I was going to get punished severely. And so, and I also had an older sister, but she was sickly. So I was the only one this was happening to. This happened to, right? So, there's all sorts of things going through why am I so bad? Why is it me only? Why, and of course, nobody in the family, my aunt maybe knew, but nobody else knew. Um, and so I made bad decisions. I never, I love my sons and I love the grandchildren I have now, but I never envisioned myself getting married, but I did. And I did twice because I married abusive men. And the first one ran off. And, so I didn't, Sarah, it's almost embarrassing for me to say because I was ignorant to a certain degree, but I was filled with shame and and no one wanted to talk about this. And it took me until I was in my 40s to even, when I tried to commit suicide and had an eating disorder, that my ex-husband actually, I was committed to a mental clinic for 7 months in and out for my eating disorder. So, but and this is the message that I want my writing to have. All right. I came through it. And I came through it because there was always something in me, call it a little light, call it a spark, call it whatever you want, whatever it came from, that I managed to get through the abuse, to get through this clinic, which was horrible. I mean, when I went in, I was 99 pounds and I'm 5'7". So you can imagine, right? So it was just one way of trying to, and it was the most horrendous experience. It was the hardest I've ever been through. And from what I know, I believe, this is not fact, but out of 8 people in my ward, I think I'm the only one that survived. And we're talking about people who were 13 years old, who had eating disorders, but of course symptomatic of something else, right? So, yeah, I mean, it just was this journey of. It just took so many years for me to be able to finally leave my ex-husband, tell my family I was gay, because my family was homophobic. My sister was ashamed of me. She didn't talk to me for years because came out to her that I was gay. At the clinic, people are telling me I'm not gay, that the abuse never happened to me. I mean, this is back in the 1990s, and it's a clinic that was world famous for its groundbreaking work with addictions. But, so women's stories aren't heard. And I think that still goes for today. If it's a topic like mine was, that's taboo, nobody wants to touch it, right? Amazon wouldn't let me advertise my book Paradise because there's references in the book to a father raping a girl. And it's not like I'm saying that that's a good thing by any stretch of the imagination, right? But nobody wanted to hear my story. So I had to finally tell it. It took me years until most of the people were not here anymore. But yeah, and so that's my main message. That's why I write, Sarah. I believe my sole purpose in writing, in the way I can reconcile what happened to me, was that it was meant to help other people.
Right. I mean, to, have gone through everything you've gone through and be willing to put yourself out there when, some of your story is taboo topics that people don't want to talk about. It shows like the importance of talking about it, because it's not like you were the only person who was going through those things at that time.
Right. Exactly. And, up until even just the other day, I was talking to someone. I reach out, and I'm a big believer in, having therapy or having coaches when you need them. And I was talking to my coach, and I said, I want to trying to promote Paradise, right? It's made into an audiobook now, so it's not just on Amazon. You can get it wherever. I said, but my family's people that are close to me that don't want me to be telling this story. And she said to me, Karen, she said, how many people don't want you to be telling the story? I said, 5. 5 people. I mean it. 5 people, significant people in my life that would rather I keep my mouth shut. She goes, and how many women would you like to reach? I said, I don't know, 1 million, 2 million, whatever, And she said, I want you to put that on your vision board and back of your desk. So every day you see 5 versus 1 million. And I've done that. And every Friday I create my Instagram post for the next week. And it's like, okay, I looked at that and I said, now I'm going to do the kind of post that I've been wanting to do, because I was hesitant. So, but I'm not ashamed of who I am. I'm proud of what I've done and what I've been through. And, I'm happy. I feel like I'm fairly well adjusted. I mean, I'm living finally, living the life that who I am. My family doesn't understand why I shave my hair, why I wear my hair shaved. But okay, it's none of your business, and I like to. This is how I like it. I've done this for 15 years now, so But you get a lot of flack yet. It's interesting. It's interesting if you don't follow the norm. And people say I'm just doing it to stand out. No, shaving your head is not. It's we're beyond that trend, right? We had that trend. So yeah.
Yes. Well, to hear that you're happy, you're living the life that you want to live, those things are so important. Now, do you have support, just kind of like for you, for your book, from people who are close to you, since you do have some people who don't want you to be sharing your story?
So, I mean, my family loves me. I feel very loved. I really do. I've got two sons, and my older one is in California, and he calls me all the time. I had an eye procedure done on my eye, and he talked to the doctor for me, and every day he calls and how are you, mom? So it real we've decided to really mutually agree to disagree, and I don't talk about the podcast I'm on. I don't talk about my writing. But as far as community, it's interesting because it's only in the last year and a half, and before we started recording, I mentioned that I'm into like the law of attraction, and I read the book The Secret, and I've been I went to a couple of workshops where I met other authors, and we've started like a mastermind group, so we meet every week. I have a coach now which I haven't had for a while. So I've actually some of the people that I've met where I live now, I've had to break off uh, con- contacts with them. I really just try to have people around me who are positive and who are believe in my message, right? So um, I don't have a big community, but I don't really need a big community. I'm live alone. I'm not in a relationship right now. I have my dogs, and I write, and having these other people who are all of the same mind as me, all have passions. The act other people in this mastermind group, actually they're coaches. They're people who want to make a change in the world and want to and have a messages to deliver. So that's really been my community. Actually, yeah, it was rough for a few years here, but I've turned it around, and I'm like a pit bull, as some people would say. I'm very persistent. I'm determined, and so probably what kept me alive. So I guess it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing to, be striving for the future, wanting to share your message. Now you have this book, Paradise. Are you like working on additional books, or is your kind of like your main message is in that book? So like that's the one, you're focusing all your energy in.
So I do want to get it out there. I mean, I would like to have more sales. So, but my next project, so as I said, I've got the two authors. I've got two books under my name, but Paradise is the one I am trying to really promote because that is the main message. But I'm right now, I have two series under Annie Moon, and I'm currently in the middle of working on the book two of one of my series. When I finish that, I'm going to go back to writing under Karen Coccioli, and I'm going to do a book called The Clinic. And I do want to. It's just going to be another tough book to read. It's going to explore deeply into the mental health facilities of women, and it's going to have the same main character, the protagonist in Claire in Paradise. And in Paradise, I kind of mentioned that she's been in a clinic and she had an eating disorder, but it was too much to go into in that book. So the next book, The Clinic, tentatively titled The Clinic, is going to be the months that I was in the inpatient and then outpatient, and what that experience was like, and about and just kind of bring light to, not that we have to, because people are very aware of eating disorders now, but just bring light to a lot of the issues that I experienced there, and the fact that they tried to tell me that I wasn't gay, and and again, just women are so afraid sometimes to tell their stories, and I don't blame them. Like I said, I was for years, so for different reasons, you're afraid.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned how eating disorders, you could potentially say are less taboo, that people are more aware about them. But I think when people think eating disorders, they think a teenager. They think someone who's kind of just hitting puberty and like just realizing kind of like what the world is, even though like that's not when you first realize what the world is, but that's, you weren't a teenager when you were,
No.
there. So that's a different angle than I would guess most of those conversations and in media portrayals, like that's where it's happening, not necessarily where you were.
No, you're right. Because there was the one girl, she was 13 years old, going on 14, but everybody else was in their 40s and 50s. And so and then we had one other young boy who was 15. But other than those two, yeah, the others were older, right? And one woman had been abused by her husband. And like I said, it was an experience that you're right. They don't talk about it now for as adults, right? Because everyone is really like still the thinner person. As much as they're more sensitive to, people who aren't, size 2, but I think I think women still are afraid of it. They're still not happy with it, right? If you're overweight, it's wrong, or you're not pretty, or whatever. But even when I was a kid, when I was young, my cousin was very obese, and back in the day my dad was afraid that I was going to get fat. And this is when I was 6 or 7 years old, and I'm talking about like late 1950s, right, in 1960, and he still had it in his head, even back then. Don't You can't get fat, can't be like your cousin. So I think parents even sometimes do it without even realizing what they're doing.
Yes. Now you had these experiences, you've put some of them into paradise, you have plans for this next book. How much of the books like are your story when like you are using like a fictitious character? Like where is that kind of line of the story?
Oh, great question. So, yeah, Paradise is actually considered a hybrid memoir because I couldn't get permission from everybody, right? So, I purposely alternated it to every other chapter. It goes from the past to the present. So, and I have a note in front of the book that all the past chapters are true. They're all me. So they're under a different name. Claire is the person who's the book. But the only thing I changed, as far as the present is not all true, because the book is such a hard read. It really is. It's a dark read. It's hard to get through. So the present had to be, and I show her journey, but I felt I had to have a happy ending. I could not end a book like that without a really happy ending. And it was the ending I would want. So she falls, madly in love at the end. But it's all part of the journey, right? So, but everything is based on my life and personal experiences. And most of the present is as well. Um, so but I took it, I was sensitive to, because people who would read it who are my family, they know it's them or me. So I was really sensitive about how I did that. I still, when it wasn't me I was writing about, I tried to, you know, write in a way that wasn't like derogatory or negative, or, so I was careful with that. And with the clinic, I'll do the same thing. I won't say the real name of the clinic. I do have um, my ex-husband actually kept the records. So I actually have the real records from back then. And uh, so I, so to answer your question, it's mostly real. And I'll put a note in the book as well that all the experiences are based on personal, except everything else is, renamed, because I have to be careful getting sued, and, be careful what I'm doing, so I'm very careful about that.
Right.
I mean, even when I'm talking on the podcast, the first time I did a podcast and I mentioned the name of the place, and I mean, they did save me. So, I lived, right? I mean, the health system has changed over the years, but then I got off and it was on a radio show actually. And I said to the woman, okay, you need to please nix that, because I didn't realize like the name came out because I just started talking. So I've been really a lot more intentional about, what I say, without still getting what happened. I don't want to hide that.
Right. Yeah. No, it's logical to make sure that you're kind of being careful in what you say while still saying enough to get your message across. But then you also have this, second sort of personality and authoring with Annie Moon. So how did those sort of books come up that you wanted to be doing those and exploring much different themes than, your other books?
Annie Moon really, really, and the moon, Annie, because my middle name is Anne, and the moon, because of when I was a child and looking out at the planets and the mysteries. And Annie Moon allows me to be, I am just so inspired. Well, I know I didn't finish that sentence. I'm so inspired by people's deepest fantasies and dreams, and things that you don't talk about. And like, let's like bring it out here. And Annie Moon allows me to be so free that, and I purposely, and the reason you mentioned something about, that I used to have all my books under one website. And then it became, when I decided, I was finding myself, I was censoring what I was writing in Annie Moon, because my grandkids or people getting on, so I decided to separate it. So anything under my name is basically, they're still maybe the taboo subjects, but they're come from a different, more mainstream. But yeah, Annie Moon, the genre would be, like I said, is gay erotica, and it just allows me to to live. Well, I do kind of live two lives even now, but even in real life I do, but allows me to express it to the fullest, right? So and yet there's a message, right? Like in my book Touch, which the two male characters, the whole premise of the story is that uh Kane, the one character, has a phobia. It's called hepaphobia, and it's a phobia, a crippling fear of being touched or touching someone else. So, can you imagine if you're like in love with someone, but you can't touch them and you can't be touched? And the whole story is how, a matter of fact, it's a 4 book series. I'm actually working on the end of it, the kind of the happy ever after journey, the book I'm working on now. But it was, how they navigated this. So even within the fun and the sex and everything else, uh, I can still, I just have so much fun playing with it. I just have so much fun playing with it. It really balances my life out. I can do the serious subjects and the serious topics and, be the kind of, well, excuse the pun, but like straight person, I mean, like, which I'm not. But and then I can be this and any moon and do what I want. But I've just always been intrigued by the, if you get on my author Annie Moon website, it's erotic writings, and I write about the balance between pleasure and pain, and I'm just fascinated by that. So I won't give that up. I've had flack about that too, but it's one of the reasons I put it under, a different pen name, and I can understand that. When my grandkids are old enough, if they want to get on, they can get on. But right now, they're kind of all banned.
You gotta do whatever makes sense for your life as it is now. To figure out where you want to be and what you want to be showcasing. So it's good to hear, how you can, have fun with that, to be free. You mentioned in your book Paradise, you wanted to make sure that you gave the character a very happy ending, so it might not be where you are currently today, but you've also mentioned at the same time, like you are happy now, like you are living a life that you want to live, even if you're not, in the same position that your character is in.
Yeah, no, I totally, and I still believe, yes, yes, you're exactly right. Someone told me not too long ago, they said, you like really are a happy person. I don't meet too many people, but I am. I'm grateful for what I have. And yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd like to be in a relationship now. And, but, um, I'll come. I mean, I maybe my years, I've been on this earth for this many years, but seriously, Sarah, am I I'm like a teenager yet. I love to do things. I love to explore things. Like I said, I love to learn. So I just don't ever perceive myself getting old mentally. It's just that knock on wood, I'm healthy. I don't, so and I think part of it is just keeping active like I do, and going after the fun stuff, right? It's yeah, I have a real treat out of being Annie Moon sometimes. And
It is great to hear, how much fun you are having in life. You're kind of starting afresh, doing new things. Now, before I start to wrap things up here at the end, is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners today?
I would just say that anyone who, please don't wait to come out until I did in my 50s. It's not any easier than it was. I mean, someone said to me, well, it has to be easier for people to coming out now. And I don't believe that. No, because if you're afraid to come out, and but I would really say I lost a lot of years, to really be living the way I wanted to be living. And so I would really, really, seek out support however you can. I always invite people to, write me on my website, contact me if, about writing, about whatever. I'd love to talk to LGBTQ groups and, offer my support. I think I'm going to be doing a writing shop at a house for abused women who live in a house for abused women. I'm going to volunteer my time and do a writing shop on rewriting their narrative, from trauma to transformation. So I really try to put myself out there in other ways other than the writing, but I'd say yes, try to find the support you need and be brave, be brave. Just think big, and like someone told me not too long ago, play big and think big, and just, make your dreams high. So that would be it.
Those are some great words for people to hear, whether they, are LGBTQ people, who are scared to come out, or, just kind of anyone living their life. So some
Mhm.
some great words there. Now, at the end of all my episodes, I do ask my guests a random question. So my question for you today is, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you be?
Great question, because I'm actually going to be moving and I've been looking at global places to live. I love being of Italian heritage. I'm going to go to Sardinia for my birthday in September, and it's also one of the blue zones of the world where everyone lives to be 100. So I don't know. I think that's pretty good. And I do want to go to Scotland and Ireland. So I do want to see that. But I think to live, I would probably, if I lived anywhere else in the world, I think would be on the sea and the Mediterranean. I don't know. That's kind of cool.
All right, that brings this episode to a close. So, of course, if you would like to connect with Karen, I'll be leaving her websites in the description. That is whether you want to check out her main website, where her book Paradise is and more about her, or if you would like to check out her Annie Moon website, that information will be there as well. Brings you to all of her social media, other podcasts she's been on, and great information like that. So feel free to check that out. If you'd like to connect with the podcast, our website, of course, is always in the description. It brings you to our past episodes, resources, and social media from prior guests, and our social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So if you want to go follow those pages, that support is always appreciated. And if you would like to be a guest on the show and share your story, my email is also in the description. That is always the best way to reach me. And if you'd like to support the podcast monetarily, there is a link to do that as well. So thank you so much, Karen, for spending time with me today, and to my listeners for taking the time out of your day to hear a new story. Until next time, bye.
Bye, Sarah. Thank you.